But you're doing exactly my point here. What happens is each time people show statistics.
Stephen A. Smith, the well-known sports commentator and outspoken personality, entered the discussion with his trademark fiery intensity on a recent episode of The View, setting up the panel for an emotional and eye-opening showdown. Everyone anticipated more political discussion when he entered, maybe including some of the same talking points they had been debating. They didn't anticipate, however, that Stephen A. Smith would totally upend their perspective, leaving everyone on set in shock. The group, which was chaired by Sunny Hostin, Whoopi Goldberg, and the others, had been vehemently critical of Donald Trump for months. They had taken advantage of every chance to attack his legal issues and his polarizing position in American politics. Smith, however, would have none of it. He had no interest in repeating the same old rhetoric or succumbing to the media's tendency toward groupthink. No, Stephen A. Smith was not only present to engage in dispute. His purpose was to correct the record, and no one on the panel was ready for the passion with which he delivered it. It all began when the topic of the Republican Party's current situation came up. Specifically, the peculiar condition of the 2024 race. The panel quickly asserted that candidates like DeSantis, Christie, Haley, and even Ramaswamy were being blatantly rejected by voters. Sunny Hostin, who has a tendency to be sardonic and sarcastic, made a pointed comment about how the Republican Party was unable to support any of its own candidates, but was still able to provide a significant amount of support to Trump, a man who, in her opinion, had committed insurrection and was facing numerous felony charges. With a tone full of doubt, she questioned, "What does that say about the Republican Party?" However, Stephen A. Smith refused to accept it. It wasn't so much about what this says about the Republican Party, he stated gently. What that says about the Democratic Party was the topic of discussion. He reminded the panel that Trump was still elected president in spite of his 2 impeachments and felony charges. And why? Because what the Democrats had to offer had become unacceptable to the American people. Smith said the Republican Party did not win the election of Trump. It was an outcry against the Democratic Party's disregard for the issues and demands of regular Americans. He vehemently maintained that the Democrats had abandoned their working-class heritage in favor of a variety of concerns that didn't appeal to the typical voter. They also forfeited the foundation that had brought them to power. Stephen A. Smith went on, "It's not about Trump winning. It has to do with what the Democrats did not provide." He then criticized the Democrats for using Trump's legal troubles as a weapon, especially his felony charges, which he claimed had only backfired. It appeared to draw attention to the flaws in their own platform the more they attempted to portray him as a criminal. If people would rather vote for an accused insurrectionist than for you, how horrible must your policies be? He queried boldly. Everyone on site was shocked by the harsh reality check. Smith wasn't finished, though. He continued by dismantling the argument that Trump's narrow margins of victory made his victories invalid. He noted that Trump only received 1.5% of the vote in the popular vote and did not receive more than 50% of the vote in the general election, which led the media and left-wing pundits to argue that he lacked a mandate. However, Stephen A. Smith also didn't agree with that point. In response, he said that Trump's victory was actually a mandate. Why? Not only that, but he won every swing state. Additionally, he saw a rise in voting turnout among important groups: young voters, Black voters, and Latino votes. Smith reminded the panel that a significant cultural shift that was impossible to deny was the fact that 89% of the counties had moved to the right in 2020. He stated emphatically that it is a requirement. The Democrats, however, were unable to accept it for some reason. They refused to acknowledge the loss. They were attempting to argue that it wasn't a blowout because teams had previously lost by more than 20 points, even though it seemed like they had lost a basketball game by that amount. According to Stephen A. Smith, this kind of denial would not alter the fact that the loss was catastrophic. "How you spin it doesn't matter," he remarked. "You were shellacked." Even historically Democratic states like California and Illinois, he said, were on the edge of turning red, indicating a significant cultural shift in the country. Furthermore, it was evident that the nation had rejected the Democratic program if Kamala Harris was unable to turn even one red county blue. However, this was when the intriguing part began. What Stephen A. Smith had just described obviously frightened Sunny Hostin, who was always the first to jump in with her harsher torts. In a mocking taunt, she asked whether Trump had done anything more than pave the way for more than 12 million illegal immigrants to enter the nation during the Biden administration. Stephen A. Smith remained unfazed. He calmly clarified that Donald Trump had really taken executive action to protect the border, reducing illegal border crossings down to 20-year record lows. Stephen A. Smith made a sharp comparison between the two administrations right there. Trump acted quickly to secure the borders and curb illegal immigration, while Biden had maintained a hands-off attitude and let millions of illegal immigrants to enter the U.S. Sunny Hostin threw up her hands sarcastically in disgust, unable to dispute with the facts. She said, "So what? He just opened up the door," but it was obvious that she was at a loss for words. The tension in the room increased as the discussion went on. The panel was unprepared for the reality of the situation, the Democrats' loss, and the resounding support for Trump in spite of his legal issues. They were obviously attempting to avoid the reality that Stephen A. Smith had revealed. The Democrats, however, were far from done. Following Stephen A. Smith's argument, White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre was the next guest on the broadcast. The timing was almost comical, as though they had intended for her to enter immediately after Smith in order to defuse the tense situation. Indeed, she disapproved with Smith's claim that Trump had a mandate right away. She went on to discuss how Trump was on course to become one of the most unpopular presidents in history in his first 100 days in office, and how his win was achieved by the narrowest margin of the popular vote in history. However, the harm had already been done. The failings of the Democrats had previously been exposed by Stephen A. Smith. And now the only reason Karine Jean-Pierre was there was to repeat the same argument. She immediately resorted to scare tactics, as was to be anticipated, asserting that the Trump administration was about to eliminate essential government services. She cautioned that the American people should be afraid that Republicans may reduce Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Another panelist, Alyssa, didn't believe it. She resisted, arguing that Trump won regardless of whether he had a mandate or not. Millions of individuals might be impacted by the nation's current tumultuous upheavals. She emphasized that the public needed to be aware of the risks involved since in many instances, essential government services were in jeopardy. Furthermore, Karine Jean-Pierre's answers were flimsy and predicated on fear tactics. By discussing the potential risks of a Trump administration, she attempted to deflect attention, but it was obvious that her argument was falling apart. One could feel the tension in the room. The panel's talking points had been successfully shredded by Stephen A. Smith. Furthermore, Karine Jean-Pierre failed to improve the Democratic Party's reputation. However, Jean-Pierre made a mistake that plunged the entire room into disarray just when it seemed like things might become much more ridiculous. While serving as Biden's press secretary, she unintentionally acknowledged that she didn't connect with him much, exposing that even the president's crew was kept apart from him. Ever the professional, Whoopi Goldberg attempted to cut to a commercial break right away, maybe to escape the consequences of Jean-Pierre's error. However, it was too late. The truth was out and the harm was done. The section ultimately turned out to be a microcosm of the broader political environment. The Democrats were having trouble holding on to power because they had not addressed the issues that regular Americans faced. Trump, however, was gaining support by presenting a style of government that appealed to millions of supporters. But the Democrats failed to recognize the signs because they were too enmeshed in their own story. They couldn't bring themselves to accept that perhaps, just possibly, Trump's vision for America was succeeding, and they wouldn't accept the fact that their party had failed.